I hope you can hear me. Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here moderating this panel with our esteemed panelists, Wendy Russell, Mark Babinson, and Liam Boyle. The topic of our session today is quite exciting from my perspective, and it is about the rise of private equity in accounting, and whether that is speaking about strategic partnerships or whether it's about increased risks to the public interest. Just for context, just set a bit of the scene and then we'll start the conversation. Over the past few years, private equity investment, or PEI, in accounting firms has accelerated at a remarkable pace, tripling in 2023 and quadrupling again in 2024. This surge signals more than just a shift in how firms are financed. It represents a fundamental transformation in firm ownership, structure, and strategy. As accounting firms respond to pressures from emerging technologies, which we just heard about, global competition, workforce dynamics, and changing client expectations, PE capital is enabling bold moves, ranging from M&A activity to expansion into new service lines. But equally with this transformation comes a new set of ethical, operational, and regulatory questions that challenge long-standing norms about the profession's independence, objectivity, and public interest responsibilities. So in this session, we will explore the profound implications of this shift with our esteemed experts here at the intersection of regulation, firm risk, and practice leadership. So while we're waiting for the chips to come in on our poll questions, maybe I'll start off with perhaps a question to our three panelists here, and it's kind of looking at the impact of private equity from a bird's eye view, if I can call it that, and really stepping back and looking at it from a market perspective. And the question for our three panelists here is, from your individual vantage points, is PEI a good thing for the market for audit and accounting services and for investors and clients? And why or why not? So maybe I'll kick off with Wendy.
Thank you. I think I've got quite a cynical audience here, but having taken private equity investment at Grant Thornton UK about 4 months ago, we are well into that journey. And I think the profession has stood still for a long time in terms of its equity structures. And I think my plea to you as we go through this session is to have a really open mind, because we're going to present some points today that might challenge those views. If you think about our firm in the UK, we're about 260 partners. We want to invest for growth. The big firms are investing billions in technology. How does a firm like Grant Thornton in the UK compete in that market? It absolutely can't without additional funding. So for us to continue to be competitive, continue to be able to offer public interest entities choice, to be able to have resilience in the market, we took a private equity investment. And actually, that's an incredible opportunity to create more opportunity in the market.
Mark, how do you see it from your vantage point, looking at it from a regulatory perspective?
Well, I suppose the interesting thing is that the focus of our discussions at this conference all require investment. In the UK, we have an audit market with a small number of very large players, and perhaps a need to build greater resilience and greater challenge within that market. And again, you can't do that without investment. Private equity has come forward as one way of doing that, and we have looked upon it as an opportunity to strengthen a market and invest in things that otherwise perhaps wouldn't be invested in. I think the one thing I would say is that private equity brings with it some challenges. And one of the reasons why we as a regulator have asked firms that are going to seek private equity investment to come and talk to us is we want to help to navigate a way through those issues. So don't cause a problem later on, fix it before you start.
Right. And that's a very interesting perspective, because it demonstrates that firms are not out on their own effectively and essentially just being masters of their own destiny, but actually they're operating within a broader context. There's an ecosystem that is an enabling ecosystem, as well as a system that provides the checks and balances. And as we see this wave of private equity coming in with the funds, etc., the financing, yes, there are going to be a lot of questions as to the implications and so forth, and therefore what are the regulatory sort of implications on a go-forward basis. But let me turn to Liam, and from your perspective, and again, it's a bit from public practice perspective, but you're not kind of in the audit space, Liam, but maybe you can share your perspectives.
So I'm 4 years in now, so Wendy's 4 months, I'm 4 years. Certainly from a journey perspective, I think Mark touched on engaging with the regulators, which is a key point. For us, finding a private equity partner made sense, getting the investment, and the key is around the investment, but doing the diligence up front as well. So you're actually ensuring that you are partnering with the right private equity fund, you ensure that there's the appropriate governance in place, and so from that corporate responsibility, ethical behaviour perspective, it actually strengthens the approach. So I've certainly found in the 4 years of my journey, you do jump in there and you think, well, actually, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? But you find significant investment, you have increased funding, you have the change from the partnership model, it becomes less political and more commercial, and you generally find that given that the private equity firm will be a regulated entity, there is more of a push towards governance and accountability and maintaining the public interest, and obviously maintaining the reputation as well. So it actually, from my view, 4 years in, I actually think it's a good thing.
Yeah. So from what I'm hearing from you, Mark, and Wendy, as well as from your remarks, Mark, it seems that private equity is kind of opening up a sort of a window of opportunity in bringing about transformations and capabilities in terms of what firms are able to do, potentially even kind of moving into new markets and so forth, which we'll explore a little bit more, a little bit further. So maybe what I'd like to do in this next round of questions, and maybe I'll address each one of those individually, is to take a bit of a dive into the arena, so to speak, in terms of where the action is happening. And maybe I'll turn to you, Mark, first, and really pick your brains as to how, as to where you're seeing the influx of private equity funding having the most significant impact on the ethical underpinning of firms, because as we have heard throughout the morning and this early part of the afternoon, the values and the living by the core beliefs of firms is really what's critical to the resiliency of the profession and the firms and so forth. But from your perspective, Mark.
I think one of the things that I've really learned through engagement with private equity investors is the importance and the consideration they undertake about what they invest in. So they're making substantial investments in audit businesses. They're not going to want to damage the reputation or the brand of what they invest in. And therefore that provides a degree of comfort that what you're not going to see is a race to the bottom in terms of audit quality, or, you know, something that is going to be questionable practice that would undermine the investment. I suppose the other thing that has been interesting is that in terms of time, most time is thinking about independence and how that works, and explaining some of our independence requirements to a private equity investor who it might be a little bit alien to, can take some time, but I think that's an investment that's well worthwhile, because actually it's then that, how do we set this up in a way that works? The really interesting thing is that private equity is not usually a long-term investment. And we have yet to see in the UK what happens at the end of an investment period, but we'll be looking with other regulatory authorities in other jurisdictions to see who gets there first. Right.
And maybe that's a good segue to Liam. Liam, you know, you're 4 years into essentially the private equity funding, and maybe you can share a bit of your your experience here is in terms of how your firm has been balancing this delicate equation, which is how do I meet the expectations of my private equity investors in terms of ROI, return on investment, against my fundamental public interest obligation as a firm of professional accountants?
And bizarrely, it's actually quite an easy answer to give, Ken. So from a private equity perspective, certainly from my experience personally, our sponsor has not been particularly hands-on. So from an operational perspective, they are not involved in the decisions and the running of the firm. They are very focused on having an appropriate governance structure in place, putting the right foundation in place to actually grow and build the firm, to ensure that we invest in our people, retain the best talent, attract the best talent, and really make a stronger business. So it's from a governance perspective and a business model perspective, we're following I suppose, build that strong foundation, build on top from a buy and build perspective, add on additional jurisdictions, replicate the same services in other geographies, but stick to what you're good at and keep doing it. And from that perspective, it drives good behaviour. We certainly follow, we have a big four background. We have exactly the same processes in place as you would expect around conflicts, independence, looking at the public interest, considering every engagement as it comes through. Do you have the right team? Are you doing the right thing from a public interest perspective? And as Mark touched on, really engaging with the regulators in each of the jurisdictions we seek to operate in. So it's early engagement with the regulators, explaining what's happening and being completely transparent.
Right. And maybe before I turn to Wendy, Mark, is this, from what you're hearing from Liam, is this consistent with how you've experienced the interaction with the firms who've taken private equity in, and especially this insight about the private equity investors really wanting to keep a certain distance from the operations of the firm, and importantly being very conscious about preserving and protecting the firm's brand and the reputation, and maybe even the quality of the work. Is this kind of aligned to your initial expectations, maybe, or were you perhaps more on the reserve side, waiting to kind of see how it would unfold?
I think we wanted to see how the model would work, but typically, a typical private equity investment in any sort of business is not a hands-on investment. It is allowing that business to invest and thrive within certain guardrails, and I think that is very consistent with what we see. All I would say is that we issued a public letter saying anyone come and talk to us. A number of firms either that have or that have considered taking investment came and had conversations, as did a number of investors. And all of those have been very positive conversations about, how do you make this work in a way that is going to meet the case for an investment, but equally then allow that investment to develop and respond in the way that the investment was planned to do.
Yeah. Wendy, from your perspective, and you're really sort of essentially wearing sort of the audit hat here, and maybe as head of audit, you've seen a lot already that's been happening already on the ground. If I may ask you, what are some of the key areas of consideration for audit firms when taking on PE investment, and how does that impact the audit practice?
I think I talked a lot about the benefits of PE investment at the start, but it comes with a lot of responsibility from an audit practice. The audit practice needs to retain its independence in the strictest way. It has to make sure it's protected against undue influence, etc., etc. As Mark said, who knows who will do the secondary transaction, the tertiary transaction, and you have to create a structure that protects you not just today, but into the future. And that was a really big area that we worked on a lot. Like, how do we create that structure that takes us through to the future? Because the investment opportunity is great, but as was mentioned before, private equity investors aren't in it for short-term gains, despite, popular belief. They're in it for enterprise value. They're in it for the story of growth. They're in it for a sustainable future for that firm that they can then sell to another party. So there is literally no point in them having a race to the bottom line to just draw out the profitability, because if that business doesn't have a great story to tell about growth, then it hasn't got value at sale. So in my experience, the private equity investor is really focused on that long term, and that is really predicated on having that great audit firm governance. It's predicated on the ethical standards, the regulatory standards, everything we do, because there is no value in a firm that has a poor brand and a poor reputation due to quality. And they've told us that. They were very clear that one of the reasons they chose to invest in us was because of our quality record. And that's really important for us and our audit partners and our firm-wide partners to hear, that nothing we do should ever compromise that. And the one single most weighted point on our scorecard when we decided which private equity house to go with was audit quality. That was the number one in terms of our weighting, because there's no point in having anything else if you can't protect that.
Very good. So maybe that's a good time to maybe take a short pause. And Linda, I just wondered if we can just bring up our sort of poll results here. So the question was, considering the public interest role of audit and accounting, do you expect private equity investment to represent, and maybe Linda, maybe you can read that for me because it's quite...
We've heard that there's some problems with the QR code, so we put the QR code up there again, and it's still not working. Could we possibly have the original large QR code put up on the screen? Okay, if everybody can just take a moment, if you have not completed the poll or answered the poll, please take a moment to do so. And then we will go to the results in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. All right, so Ken, let's see if I can read this. Considering the public interest role of audit and accounting, do you expect private equity investment to represent more of an opportunity than a risk, more of a risk than an opportunity, no significant impact, or not familiar enough to assess? So right now it looks like,
Interesting. Well, it seems the chips are still coming in, Linda. So maybe we'll come around to this to close off towards the end of our session here. But maybe I'll just move on to our next sort of set of questions here, and maybe I'll turn to Liam first. And what we're going to be doing here is we've kind of delved a little bit into, let's say, we've stepped into a bit of the arena here. But I'd like to maybe pull ourselves out and kind of look ahead, or even have some further reflections in terms of how things are going. But Liam, from your perspective, having already been in the arena already and kicking the tires and all of that, but if I were to ask you if you had a crystal ball and you would gaze into that crystal ball, how do you see the landscape of firms, let's say in 5 years' time, given this very significant and rapid rise in the private equity investment trend, from your perspective?
So from my perspective, I see private equity remaining interested in the profession. So I don't think private equity will go away. They will still be around. They will still be interested in investing. They've dipped their toe in and have been particularly interested. And so Wendy and I both know from experience they're quite keen, they're very focused, they do a huge amount of diligence as I suppose in the firm they're acquiring, as well as the firm actually doing its diligence on the private equity fund. Mm-hmm. I certainly know from experience, and Wendy will probably say exactly the same, we had several offers and we went through that scorecard, and it was very much around the integrity of that fund itself and the ability to actually create that platform. I see more divestment from the accounting firms of non-audit services, and that's a trend I've seen over the last 4 years. So Teneo was a spin out from the Deloitte restructuring business in the UK. It's grown, setting up in Ireland, so engaging with Chartered Accountants Ireland. It's then acquired businesses from KPMG in the Caribbean. We have just bought PwC's restructuring business in Australia. And again, lots of regulatory interaction from that perspective. But you're seeing the firms divesting more, and the firms actually divesting and ensuring they actually get some value from the departing partners, as opposed to a bunch of partners disappearing with no value, having a dispute and being in the garden. So I can see some positivity there. So I can see probably more splintering from an audit, non-audit services perspective, and I can see, I suppose, the rules, the audit independence rules, driving some of that as well. And I suppose changes in the corporate structures as well. If you look at, from a private equity perspective, there's been a push more towards, from a corporate governance perspective, fewer partnerships. So you take that partnership and really have a corporate entity, so more corporate entities, which leads to stronger governance and building that stable platform for the business to transition to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. So there's no focus from a profit per partner number. It's more around the enterprise value of the business and really developing people, developing the next generation, and really, I suppose, safeguarding the profession.
Right, right. I mean, just hearing from you Liam, I just wish my iPhone had enough battery to last 5 years, because what I would have loved to do is literally to set it standing with the video on, and literally see the landscape unfolding for the next 5 years, and then just do a fast forward, and then literally see how the market sort of transforms. But Mark, if I could turn to you, and maybe I'll try to provoke you a bit here. Given that you're literally sitting in the middle of two representatives from the firms, but as a regulator, there must be something that keeps you awake at night, right?
Well, lots of things keep me awake at night, Ken, but
when it comes to PE investments.
So I think for me, the biggest concern was ensuring that the PE investor coming in understood what the independence implications were on their business. Because I think one of the things that regulators perhaps aren't aware of is private equity moves with speed. And when you're thinking about independence, you think about the private equity fund, and you think about the investment it makes in an audit firm, and then you think about the other investments it makes. Yeah. And those change overnight, sometimes several times a day. Yeah. So therefore you need to have a way of making the independence requirements workable in a way that doesn't create endless breaches and regulatory issues. So I think it was getting that right. And I think the other thing as well is that, there's always this question over to what extent does your investor have an influence? And, we decided for the purposes of looking at ethics and independence in the UK, the investor was likely to be a covered person or covered member. And I thought that was probably going to be a difficult conversation to have, but actually the investors that we've had conversations with were very open to dealing with that question and ensuring that it was built in their corporate structure and their governance so that they could deal with that in a way that didn't cause a problem to emerge later on.
Right. So it sounds like really, at least those who've been engaged with on the PE investor side have literally jumped in with eyes wide open, really understanding what they're getting into, and then really understanding that this is a space that they have to really tread carefully, be sensitive about some of the regulatory requirements about independence and any other sort of requirements that might sit in law or regulation, insofar as perhaps ownership of the firms might be concerned and so forth. So that's good. But Wendy, if I were to turn to you, and having heard from Mark, what Mark said, in fact, was a bit scary, because when you think about the PE investors being really very active investors and potentially changing their portfolios quite a high level of churn, let's say, and that potentially triggering independence breaches. I mean, would that have been one of those lessons, at least insofar as you've learned to date, or were there other key lessons you've learned insofar as from your firm perspective anyway?
Yeah, I think from a firm perspective, I wouldn't underestimate the amount of time it takes to work through these things and to take the regulators with you on your journey. So the earlier you can engage is quicker, the earlier you can introduce the regulator to your proposed investor is really helpful. It brings it to life and it gets them an opportunity to challenge one another and discuss that. You know, these private equity houses are sophisticated investors. They do not make quick decisions. They make long, purposeful decisions on investment. So we're not dealing with mavericks here in relation to compliance and governance. They're quite the opposite, actually, as Liam said. And I think the quicker you can engage that, the better. From a regulatory perspective, you need to understand that this market moves quickly, and so you can't take too long in working it through. And that was a debate we had with our regulators. We respect you need time, but actually there's only a limit to how much time you can take because the market's moving very quickly. So from a firm perspective, you need to engage early. From a regulatory perspective, you need to understand that this thing moves quickly. And if many governments are pro-growth, trying to encourage businesses to grow, actually if you want to be pro-growth in your economy, then the quicker you engage with this, the better. I know 69% of people still think there's a risk. Actually, it's a bit like technology. I don't think private equity investment's going away. I don't think PE investment's going away. So it's how do we lean into it and really try and unpick some of the challenges.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Wendy. I think a lot of insights there that I'd love to be able to further unpack, but I'm just conscious of time as well, and I want to give an opportunity for our audience here to be able to participate in the discussions. So. Linda, or maybe we'll open up for any questions from the audience here in person or perhaps online as well, if there are any questions. All right, we have a question here from Caroline Nee, who's online, and it's a question for Wendy. What is the level of transparency of disclosure to your stakeholders, meaning your partners, staff, clients, and regulators as you're working through private equity?
Really, really high. I mean, when we went through our partner vote, we had 100% partners on board with it because we were very transparent and took everyone on a journey. We took our staff on a journey. We were very transparent with all our clients. We explained why we're doing and why. We were transparent with the regulators. So I think, actually, if you want to build trust and credibility, then you have to be really transparent.
Maybe I'll take that question even further and stretch it, just in terms of what we were saying in terms of the responses on the polling question here. And I just noticed that there were the responses more leaning towards a perception of greater risk than, let's say, advantages or benefits. In your estimation, Wendy, would you think that with greater transparency to a broader range of stakeholders beyond just the partners, staff, clients, and regulators, let's say to the broader market, there might be better understanding, maybe with a more transparent narrative around what the investors are in it for and the precautions they're taking and how they're working with you?
Yeah.
Would that help? Maybe help, let's say the market better understand?
Yeah, and I think the more firms take private equity investment, the more that dialogue will increase. Audit committee chairs, for instance, do they really understand what that means for the resilience of their audit firm? And if they're engaging with the firm for 5 years, 10 years, what does that mean? Absolutely. The more disclosure, the more open we can talk about this. But there are only a certain number of firms that are on this journey. So the more firms that become part of the journey, there'll be more disclosure. But we're certainly very open to talk about anything with anyone.
All right. Oh, yep. We have a question in the audience here.
Can you hear?
Yep.
Thank you. James Barber of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland. We recently did a paper in this, and it was an objective paper, and it highlighted the pros and the cons of private equity investment. But one of the key risks, obviously, is looking ahead, and I wish I had a DeLorean or a TARDIS to look ahead and say, what will the impact be as these private equity firms look to exit Do you have any comments on how you see the future in terms of that? Because in our discussions, that was one of the biggest risks, was just what would the exit strategy be for these PE houses? Thank you.
Can I answer that one? And
yes.
James, good to see you as a fellow ICAS member. I suppose having been in 4 years, the average private equity cycle is 6 years. And so Wendy's touched on the private equity approach is very much around building that enterprise value. So taking something, investing in it, making it the best it can be, ensuring there's high quality, so that there's that growth story as well. So you have something that's equal, you buy something, you take that rough cut diamond, you sparkle it up quite a bit, but not completely. You make it very attractive. Somebody else then wants to buy it and pay you more money. So it then comes down to the point of the fact, what is your exit here? Well, it's either through a sale to another private equity firm, it's either a sale to another firm, which is pretty unusual, or an IPO. And in all likelihood, it's more likely to be another private equity transaction, moving on to somebody else to enable that strategy to continue. And again, it comes round to the fact that the initial risks that we touched on, looking at doing the evaluation, talking to the regulators, making sure you're partnering with the right private equity fund to ensure that you can, I suppose, act as a custodian of the business and pass it on to the next party, really, with that governance intact, is key.
Right. All right, we have another question from the audience here.
Building on the question just before on the exit strategy, I suppose my concern is that you separate the consultancy business from the audit business. You can find good buyers for the consultancy business. That could even be an IPO or international accountancy or tax advisor, for instance. And then you are left with the scraps in terms of the audit, because that's not really where I see an IPO market, for obvious reasons. So how do you see that as a risk, and are there any measures that can be done to ensure that we not end up losing another audit firm?
It's interesting that you referred to the audit business as being the scraps, because actually private equity, in a multidisciplinary firm, I think private equity see audit business as the jewel, because it's recurring, it's predictable, you can plan ahead with it. So actually, from a multidisciplinary perspective, a business without audit, tenure aside, obviously, Liam, is less, our firm would be less valuable without the audit practice. So I don't think audit is the scraps anymore, actually. I think it's a really core, fundamental part of multidisciplinary firms, which I think will continue to go forward.
But I do think that, in respect of that point, if it happens in an audit firm where the answer is, say, an IPO of the non-audit business, that is going to require some careful thinking through, not just from firms that might be in that position, but their regulators as well, because it will have, the first time it happens, a sort of disruptive effect on the market. And it's one that, when a question came out earlier of, thinking about the exit strategy, if we knew the answer to the exit strategy, we wouldn't be sitting here, we'd be on our yachts.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up to time, and I did ask Liam earlier on to look into his crystal ball. I think you need a bigger crystal ball, Liam, to tell us how these things are going to transpire, and as we go forward. But if I were to ask you to really apply your System 1 thinking, literally give me your quick answer to this question. What's the one key piece of advice you would have for firms that are contemplating taking PE investment? Again, just System 1. Wendy.
I'd say communication and transparency. You have to take everyone on the journey with you, internally and externally, or else you're not setting up for success.
Very good. Come and talk to us. There's got to be an open dialogue.
Liam?
A difficult one to follow with both of those points, but I'd also say undertake your diligence, have the private equity firm undertake its diligence so it's going in with its eyes wide open, undertake your diligence and ensure you have the appropriate corporate structure in place and governance in place so that you actually have a safe business to have and pass on.
Fantastic, fantastic insights. Listen, it's going to take me perhaps a fair amount to synthesize and summarize all the fantastic insights we've received here, but private equity, at least from my key takeaways, is here to stay. Watch this space. This is to be continued, and we will have further conversations. But thank you so much, Wendy, Mark, and Liam, for your insights. It's just been really insightful. Thank you very much.